Welcome all to November the 10th, 2022 distribution demo. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about whether we can actually use ubi-minimal for the final images of the CNG for the UBI and FIPS based images that are on the same track. And what the challenges are there, what the benefits are, and maybe look into a few of the, hey, what's going on here situations that we run into a few times. So in the notes, I've put a couple of things. First things first is, a discussion about using a distro-less image. TLDR on that is that we should be looking to try and use a much more minimalized image if possible. The full fat UBI image is, well, fat. So reducing that is even better. The tricky part here is, what do we actually need in order to function? And what silent assumptions do pieces of our tools and their compilers make about the operating system as they have available? These are the biggest ones, is that people who do make files, developers, make certain assumptions about the environment that they're going to be operating in. Whether it's conscious, intentional, or not, it just happens that they're not as familiar with working in much smaller and restricted systems, right? So when you have something that depends on a library that's just always there because it's a base package in most full fat distributions where they feel most people are operating that particular code and compiler, then, you can get away with it. However, when that assumption turns out to be wrong, which is often the case in highly minimalized distributions, such as Alpine or UBI minimal or even UBI micro, well, now we're talking about a whole different beast, and we get to learn the hard way what the assumptions are. Because when you get a message that says, empty string, no such file, what? That's not exactly a usable error message, so you get to go looking into root causes of why is a file not present when it doesn't even know what the file it's looking for is? Okay. And then there's some other fun stuff like, every distribution has user add, right? Oh, the answer is no, they don't. It's not that the distribution does not have it, it's that it's not by default in the base OS, depending on how you've selected to do the base OS. And in a container, ideally, you're chunking off everything you don't need, which means literally you don't need to have user add. Don't have user add, right? So in the case of ubi-minimal, as an example, there is no shadow utils, which, by the way, is the common package name, right? So where do you install it? When do you install it? Can you remove it? When do you remove it? Optimization choices. And they matter because if you just go, well, the easy one is we just put it in the base image. Hint, yes, I've done that in my MRs. That's why it's in draft. Because then you can just fix all the images at once. The problem is now all your images have user add and all the rest of shadow utils that you don't actually need for an operational program that doesn't manage users, right? So let's go digging into those. But I guess I'm going to rearrange what I have in the notes here before we go digging into those specific ones. Let's look at, like, why. Why does UBI minimal versus UBI make a difference? What's the value add going down in size, down in default packages, and things like this? So if we look strictly at it, the first things that we care about is the difference in size, right? ubi-minimal, I'm going to hit share screen. That window, hit share. Zoom toolbar, can you get out of the way, please? You. Okay. And you out of the way too. Awesome. So, let's see. Boop, boop. I was futzing around in the two images trying to see the differences earlier. Here's the full fat UBI. Inspect. JQ dot size. Now this is the unpacked image size. Let's see, that's 200-ish megs, right? Now if I do the same thing in minimal, that seems like a whole order of magnitude less, doesn't it? And that's the unpacked size. We're talking about the difference between, 200 megs and 94 megs, right? That just the base image is now half the size. That's pretty impactful, right? Now, if I do Scopio inspect or UBI minimal, right? And I'm just gonna YQ and then I'm gonna do delete repo tags because we don't need that information. Give me a pretty form, please. Now, this is most recently built 2 weeks ago, right? So let me go ahead and pull up this specific piece of data, right? So this tells me that it is compressed just about 39 megs, right? Now, if I do the same thing and I take minimal out, compressed, that's 80 megs. So it's literally half the difference for both images in terms of transit over the wire and permanent storage, right? So it doesn't seem like much at first. Like, oh, well, your base image stays 50%. Okay. Well, then you start to take into consideration the things that you no longer have or have to worry about or other things, right? So the impact of the result of the difference between the two images. If I look at, let's see, this one. Okay, so this is the full fat one, right? If I look at micro DNF and I look at DNF in terms of what their requirements are, right? DNF is an installable package on the full-size UBI. Its details are here, and I can get the specifics of where it came from here. But the big difference is DNF is a full-fledged lightweight implementation written in C. Right? Now, it's not as complex and it doesn't necessarily do everything right, but one of the biggest things is you don't have any of the interpreter stack, which means there's no system Python, there's no system Perl, right? If I go over here, no Perl, no Python. There's not even find, right? Yes, that has to be kept aware of, but there's no find. So micro DNF install find. Whoops. Classic demo. I can type. Was it provides find? What package is that, please? Oh, I'm sorry. It's find utils. I'm gonna do find slash dash name. And I'm gonna do Python star. So we have user share GCC 8 Python and this RPM macro helper, but there's nothing really else in here, right? Now, if I do that same search on the full fat image, that's a lot more. Whoops, I can type again. Perl, right? You don't see anything there. See anything there. I'm going to go right to doing typed. Only thing we get is sys modules. Now I do that here, and we get Python. Right, so we take an entire runtime out of the environment. Basically, we go down in the package manager, we go down in the requirements for that. We take an entire class of possible surface and vulnerability. Gone. It's bye-byed. Right? Well, the downside to that is, as you saw in minimal, we didn't even have find. Right? So there's a lot of packages that are just, most people assume are present, that aren't. And we run into that, and that ties into the other problems that we have. Oh yeah, here's a fun one. Guess what's also not present in microDNF? Interesting. Now I'm going to run that same thing over here. Gee, that's a whole lot more stuff, isn't it? When we look at just the library bits, what's present here includes a couple of the actual needed binaries for a couple of programs from packages, but systemd itself is not present. So while you can run into possible issues and say like libresolve, the surface difference is massive because all of these binaries are not there, and a significant portion of the package requirements, bashisms, other pieces that might be a concern, gone. And for those of us that have been keeping up with what the scanners like to yell at us about, that's a significant portion of things that if we don't have these packages that aren't needed, then we get a distinctly different package size and a different surface, and thus a different result from the scanners. As called out by one of our security team, the difference is 94 to 27, right, on a base image. And that's a distinct difference that matters when our team ends up having to go figure out why something is there and if it's actually vulnerable or not.
Jason, can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Is this more of a benefit for us internally in development? Like the size, since we're pulling the images so much, I guess?
So it's not about us versus others, okay? There is an OpEx value for us when it comes to image sizes. And we've covered this in previous demos, but I'll summarize it here. The less we produce in artifacts, right, by size alone, our storage will go down. But because there's less storage being consumed, there's less data that has to be transferred. Less data means less time. Less time means more time for other things. So we end up with more performant pipelines because we're literally doing less. Right?
Yeah.
Money, because while we get to clean up our registry, every image that we produce is going to be there as a tagged release, right, in perpetuity for an unknown period of time. If we reduce an image size by 50%, and to be fair, the likelihood that we fully reduce every image by 50% is small. But let's say we go with a conservative estimate and we reduce all images by 20%, right? That's 20% savings on storage on every single image going forward. And that is a lot, right? It doesn't seem like it, but it adds up super fast. And that same 20% in storage is also saved in CDN costs, transit costs in and out of the cloud, transit costs between zones. Like it adds up repeatedly across all of these things. And that also affects every customer too. because that means that the tarball that they have to produce and store and transit into an air-gapped environment is smaller, takes less time, it's more performant for them. When you're then turning around and actually deploying these containers to boot, you also get the benefit of now getting their transits to you, which means that's a good thing. You can get the containers to start faster because they're not waiting on it, especially in certain platforms for Kubernetes that serialize container pool, right? Meaning serialized, meaning you only get, they go into the queue and they come as they come, right? Second, there's less storage on the node that's being consumed just by the layers themselves of the images, which means it's actually more performant for the customer because we're not taking up as much space on disk, which means they can do more things with that node. And technically, ours have more space to work with when it comes to temporary storage.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the next question of what is up with this Sherlock Holmes, right? So here's an example. We're in Gitaly, and Sherlock Holmes gets pulled. And we get the weirdest error ever. Could not build. Okay, cool. extconf.rb failed. Okay. Could not create make file due to some reason. Some reason. Check the makemf log for more details. You may need to configuration options. Okay. That's fair. What? It's literally telling you, in empty string, no such file or directory. Huh? How do we even figure this one out? Right? Let's dive on this one. What are actually the real dependencies of this gem? That's the first question. Right? Like, what does it say that it needs? So if we pop off to its actual declaration of its extconf RB, then let's see what we've got here. Now this is, I'm looking at 077 because that's the latest revision that's out there. So it declares that it actually needs to make sure that you assume it's got make. Okay. And then you have an expectation for package config. Right now, funny part is it doesn't say that. It's just an assumed because it's in build essentials. Remember what I talked about assumptions? It wants ICU specifically, and it wants these three pieces of it. And then it's going to CXX flags if it looks like CXX doesn't have the behaviors for the standard library set, then it says I want C++11. All right, we'll see about that one. And then it says, oh, I'm looking specifically for ICU and Unicode UCNV, right? So it wants to know how to do conversion, saying, please make sure you have ICU dev, right? Then we have, it's looking for libz, it's looking for ICUC and ICU data. Okay, that seems simple enough, right? Well, apparently there's something else it needs. Question is, what? Right? So the first question is, what in the world does that even mean? Because that error message just doesn't help. Could not create makefile due to some reason. Right? So, the easy way is Google that. Gee, I think a few people have run into that before. So to do FFI and it blew up on them. Let's see, did they get the really weird message? No, they actually got completely failed on FFI. Okay. And they're saying compiler failed to generate. Okay. What do they say? They're missing some CLI behaviors. They say that doesn't really fix that. Okay, and then they still got other failures. Here's one saying, here's that. Now, yeah, the make-mf log is really what we need to see, but how do we get to the make-mf log? From the inside of a container, we don't. At least not from the CI. Well, they ran into a couple of interesting issues. I'm sorry, I'll be right back. My package has arrived.
Hey, Mitch, I'm going to Slack you another issue for Infor, similar to the log rotate. They have a backup issue that they put as for scheduling, and they were asking when it's going to be done in 15.6, but we never actually made it deliverable. So
that's good.
All right, sorry about that. I've been waiting that package. I need to make sure I got it today. All right. Interesting that someone actually ended up saying the real problem is they were missing a package, the auto reconf. So let's close that one and have a look at this. This one was for Nokogiri, which, by the way, we make use of. So maybe we'll keep an eye out for that one. And this one was for slightly more recently. When it exploded, it at least made it much farther. We didn't even get to the point we could make a makefile. Okay, then. So, how do we get to this file? Right, the only way we're going to really do that is to replicate where we're at in this particular container. So I am going to check my most recent pipeline builds. Unsurprisingly, Giddily went boom. Let's see what mailroom exploded on. Did you do the same thing? Hey, look, Sherlock Holmes also exploded. All right, so this one is smaller, though. It only has GitLab Ruby. So I'm going to... see here, cd GitLab mailroom. And I need the artifacts out of here so I can get Ruby, because I'm going to need Ruby to actually compile. Where... oh, right. I need to go to Ruby to grab it from there. I was like, wait a minute. Where's my artifacts at? Browse. Facts. UBI. Move that here. Mailroom, I'm going to go over here. And I need mailroom and build. The good news is that looks relatively straightforward. Build image. is empty. You need to pass that. Good news is just go from, find the from line. There we go. Pull that. I pulled the wrong. This is what I actually needed here. Pull the builder image, which is ideally the thing that has all of the components that we care about. All right, now, in this particular case, we need to make sure that we pass in build image as an argument. We need to get the shared build scripts in. So I'm going to do cptech-r build scripts. Make sure I have a copy of that in here for the context. So I've got the assets that it's going to need, and I've got the context that it's going to need. And then it's going to do make assets. Here's that. And we're going to go. Let's see here. I'm going to go docker run pi rm b dot make this easy and just go here. Bin bash. Okay. Intent build. I have to look at /local. There's all the stuff that I cared about. So let's go through the same steps this would. Victor / assets. Gem install GitLab mail room colon 0.20. Why is there no gem? Okay, so that's already set. Oh, because I haven't actually unpacked. Note to self, Docker add doesn't just add the file, it actually unpacks it. Doink. R xf local GitLab ruby -c to /. Unpack it as if root was the base. Now, should have gem. Hey, look at that. I'm going to try installing just that first. See if that works. Okay, that had no problems. Let's go ahead and jump straight into Sherlock Holmes. 0.7.6. That exploded quickly. Let's see. That. Well, that's useful. That wasn't useful at all, actually. From extconf rb12 in main, blank, no such file or directory. Okay. Let's see. Are we missing anything? Make mf log for more details. Bind / name *mk mf .log. Hey, what happened there? No idea. Let's give the Redis gem a try, just to see if we're missing something. Gem install. No, not really an issue. To be fair, I don't think that one actually has anything of problematic origin. So now the question is, like, why is makefile blowing up? So the first thing we have is number 1 is require make mf. And then we have this. Now it says RB12, no such file. Now this one here says make strip empty at line 3. Let me go back and go to the tag and go to 7.6. Doop-a-doop, line 12, which make strip empty. Which? Huh. That's weird. Remember that when I said assumptions? Guess what? DNF provides which. Well, that comes from the which package, so let's try installing that and try again. Micro DNF.
Package?
Which package provides which?
Right.
Which? Okay, so now we've actually installed that. Now let's go look at gem install Sherlock. Let's see if it works now. Let's see what else blows up, because now that we know which is which, we can turn around and make sure that things work. Oh, that was fast. Well, that should be simple, right? So now remember, we based on UBI Builder, which ideally was attempting to be based on UBI Micro. Not Micro, but Minimal, I'm sorry. So if I go back to UBI Builder, which is, here we are, and we go added package config, let's add which in here. Going to add find while we're here. It may not be needed, but it's only in the builder image, not the final one. So let's just be sure. Right? Actually, on that note, let me look at base. Okay, I already added find utils. Good. I was like, I'll have that one explode. Okay, so now we're back to get status. Get diff. All we've done is add package config to make sure it's there, and then which and find utils. Package config may not be needed, but we've seen in the xtconf that it assumes that it's going to be using package config. So let's just be safe and be very explicit. I can look at here and DNF which package config.
What all comes in that build essentials package? Because I think I saw that in the warning message for if you don't have make.
Well, there is no build essentials here. That's a, if you looked, it was an apt, which means it's an Ubuntu, sometimes Debian. And that's a good question, is like, what's in that? If I were to go and do that here in this Debian-based image, I could go find that out. I pulled down the Rails master, which is the Debian-based one, and basically went LDD on the final output to go figure out maybe there's something actually missing in terms of real functionality. But as we found out, which witches and which distro is apparently the problem. So, is package config actually a package? Let's go make sure of that. So here's DNF, micro DNF, install package config. Nothing to do. Micro DNF, remove package config. Transaction was empty. Search. Is there a search? Repo query. I guess the question is, what is the correct thing? Because I don't want to like make a commit that doesn't help. Pac-Man Rosetta to the help here. It's just DNF search. Okay, so DNF search package config. Red Hat, your naming convention is annoying. Package conf, package config. Okay. Micro DNF install. Remove. Okay, so that is indeed it, but it appears it was already installed. So let me hit exit. I'm going to run it again. You can see I've got no history. It's all back to the same state. So micro DNF install the package. Okay, so something in the pile of things resulted in package config having been installed. So let me remove it. And then I'm going to grab this giant pile of things. Actually, you know what? Let me take that out and then do this. Okay, so package config is there because I added it here. Something else may have put it in. Control C. Good, it's not letting me stop in the middle of package installation. Good. Good package manager. In case you're wondering, everyone, you do not want to Control C in the middle of unpacking tarballs into your file system. You will end up with a broken system. So I'm going to do exit. And I'm going to go ahead and run it again. This time I'm going to take out the package config just to see if it gets installed with everything else. Why? Don't manually maintain things you don't need to manually maintain. Okay, something already pulls it in. So other things we're doing don't need that. So I will take package config out and leave in my comment that I need which and find utils for sanity. Okay, so git diff git add. Whoops. Classic UI failures by the human during a demo, right? Git commit stack m ubi builder add which and find utils for sanity slash Charlotte. Nah, I'm gonna rewrite all these commits later, but git push tac u origin my branch thump. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and go to this new tab for the whole pipeline that I had. Closey, closey, closey. Okay, it's already failed, which means the changes that I pushed to try and unbreak a few things have fixed themselves. Let's see what container registry exploded with. Build Rails failed, build mailroom failed, build Giddily failed. How much you bet all three of those failed on Sherlock Holmes? So Rails. I know mailroom did. I know Giddily did. So let's go see if Rails did. Container registry was going, I don't have add user. Okay. Oh, wait. Because registry explicitly actually goes and bases directly off of minimal to GitLab base. There are unicorns out there. TLDR, by the way, this is because GitLab container registry does not actually follow the exact same pattern as the rest of the images in terms of being based on GitLab base, inheriting set config patterns, and a few of the other things that make the other ones common runtime patterns up. All right, so we look at GitLab Rails, and previously, sure enough, it blew up on Sherlock Holmes as well. Surprise! Refresh. Can I have my new pipeline, please? Here's my new pipeline. Link in new tab. All right. So going back to the demo notes. There we are. So retouching while these build, basically. Right. So let's watch this job and we'll pick to watch mailroom. Right. It'll fire first, that's why. If we go and we look at adding GitLab base, we added shadow utils because add user is required. Right? And the reasoning behind that is relatively simple. DNF provides add user because that's the package that provides it. And you can see by default, it gets system packages in the fat UBI, whereas micro DNF install shadow utils. See, it wasn't already installed. We actually needed it because there's nothing there, right? So what else can we deal with? What else do we find? Now, if we add it in base, the good news is all of the run images won't actually have to install it. That's the shortcut. It feels like the most impactful change, but now we're shipping all of shadow utils in all the things. How would we go about doing this if we didn't want to leave shadow utils around? Very short answer. MicroDNF actually has a handy dandy clean all. Keep the images compact. So if we look at MicroDNF, clean all, clean help. And it just removes all the cache data. But we don't have to go, remove the package cache ourselves, which is not great to have to do that in the first place. If we were to take this microdnf clean all and actually put it down here at the bottom, what we could do is do the install and then at the bottom uninstall it and anything that went with it, if we can figure out how, and then clean, and then it's no longer going to be there. We have it for the layer, and then it's gone. Now, the problem is what happens if you get polluted packages? Do you really need to keep SE manage around? Right. I mean, SE manage might be one of those things that we do need, but like we just installed shadow utils. Let's see what happens when we remove it. Move. Well, only shadow utils with it. So SE manage stuck around. Right? This is a classic package manager issue. When you install a package, it installs things with it. When you remove the package, it doesn't exactly know why something was there all the time. Especially microdnf, remember, is a minimalized and doesn't have some of the scripting patterns DNF has because it no longer has Python. Right? So keep in mind those kinds of things. But in theory, we could, install it, do everything needed, and then take it out. It's also entirely possible that we could basically turn add user, instead of it being add user, we could end up putting something into the build scripts or scripts itself that basically tries to run DNF install add user and then turns around and rips it back out. Not great, but it's either that or we repeat ourselves all over the place. Right, because we need to add it on every image, and then we need to turn around and remove it on every image. So we end up with 1-line modification, 2-line modification, and then we just rearrange a couple of lines, right? But now that's basically 3-line change in every single final image. Do we really want to maintain it that way or have some sort of composability that makes this sane? I don't know. We'll have to figure that one out going forward. But it's actually better to not have add user in the image at all. So let's go back and look at this since Sherlock Holmes was exploding. Mailroom, have you triggered yet? Refresh. Nope, not yet. Container registry build is firing. We're waiting on this stack. So I believe these are all phase 2s. We're just waiting for that job to run in parallel. Pages ran. That's good. And anybody else? Nope, nobody that's going to blow up on us in a weird way. New tab. Nope, none of these have fired yet. Looks like they should soon, though. Oh, I see. Neither one has actually fired because they both rely on Ruby. So we're really waiting for mailroom to fire once Ruby is done, which looks like it just got done. So mailroom says it's triggering now. There we go.
There's some check, I'm thinking back to like operator certification. There's some checks to make sure that our image is directly based on UBI or UBI minimal, right? We couldn't make a GitLab flavor of that image as our final runtime image that just has the GitLab user pre-baked in without add user baked in.
Effectively true. So there are creative ways, but the summary is that you need to have your final image to be, you have to be based on one of their images to be certified, because they certify their base. They can't certify yours if you're not based on them. It's insane enough.
Yeah.
The way around that is to do some insane things. The summary is, woohoo, look, Sherlock Holmes didn't blow up. The way around that is to deal with the fact that you have to be based on their image, which means you have to be compatible with their image. So, if you know what you're doing and you pay attention to the details, it's entirely possible to actually build the application and all its dependencies on full fat UBI and know what parts you actually need out of that image and slap them all the way down into UBI micro. And then your base image is not 90 megs, it's 9 megs. However, how much of that do you need? Because UBI micro is tiny, right? What are the assumptions that you need to care about in order to do that? Like, even to go from build on UBI fat to UBI minimal, we just saw stuff go weird, right? And I'm doing this right now as though everything would be based on UBI minimal so that we have a flat group of assumptions. We don't, yeah, all the gem is built and everything's good. And then you go to run it and you're like, it doesn't have a witch, right? And we have programs that shell out, so we have to care. If you have clear dependencies, you can basically just find all the executables, see if they're binary forms. If they're binary forms, LDD, pull all their dependencies and make sure those all end up in the final image. There's behaviors for that. And then you have, well, if it's a Ruby or it's a Python or it's a Perl, how do we do this? Where does it come from? Where do all this fun stuff comes into play, right? What do you use to exercise the application in full to get a full S trace to make sure that you have identified every single file that gets opened, every single executable that is executed, every single directory that is looked at, right? You literally have to do a full end-to-end test that has a 100% code coverage. Yeah, you heard me. To be dead certain that everything is recorded. Anybody know how much code coverage the GitLab Rails codebase has? Here's a hint. It
Not
doesn't
100.
start with 9. So it doesn't start with 10 either. So that kind of is a problem. Because you know how you find out a silent dependency? When it fails. And if people aren't building the images and testing the images through all of their code and anybody else's code, they will happen. More than once. Let's see, how we doing here? Update me. GitLab is still running, which is good. Good. Surprising how much one little utility not being present in a base system broke all kinds of things for no reason at all. Right. So I'm basically looking for the large I'm going to explode scenarios right now before I proceed any farther. And what we did look at was the container registry we know will explode because it is based off ubi-minimal and does not have add user. We earlier saw that we didn't have add user, and that's why a lot of things blew up. Most of that was fixed by actually just installing shadow utils in GitLab base as the shortcut. We'll have to individually add that specifically to the registry because, well, it doesn't work the same. And the Sherlock Holmes was literally a false assumption because which is which on which is not accurate. Fun to say, but it's not accurate. So we have one more change that we can make on the call, which is to go to the container registry, go into UBI, go down here, and we have no DNF install at all. Okay, so this is where I'm going to just this for the sake of repetition in a registry here. I'm going to take this off. Put it on here. By the way, consistency and patterns. Where do the ands go? We haven't made that consistent. So micro DNF. Remove shadow utils. None of this basically is needed. And then we install shadow utils. Dun, dun, dun. Right. And just for the sake of this, I'm going to look at its process wrapper. And I'm going to see if it needs things like find utils.
We will, the actual add user call was a few lines up, right? So we'll want to move that down.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. The nice thing about Docker run command is you can put comments in the middle of them on multi-lines because Docker will strip them out before it does the compilation of the run command. So it messes with your eyes. If you're reading shell script purely, one, don't do that. Two, textually speaking, comments inline don't end up in the run command, so you can do that, even as confusing as it may seem. And yes, you can put like 5 lines of comments, and it will just do that when you actually get around to running the Docker file. So we'll do that there. Now let's look at the rest of its scripts. Wait for deps has test, sleep. Let's make sure that minimal has sleep, or ubi-minimal has sleep. Okay, it has sleep. And it has functional sleep with numeric suffixes. Good. Do we have test? Good, we have test. let's try 1 EQ 0. Echo. Right. Good. All right, test behaves the way we expect. That's always a good sign. Let's look at process wrapper. We just exec right into it, so we're good there. Health check. Has curl. All right, let's make sure curl's there. Which curl? Did we install curl? Okay, curl's already there in the base image. Which isn't, but curl is. I don't blame them. I'm glad they have curl. Okay, so next one up is the UBI entry point, which just does a couple of exports. This is UBI entry point is actually here for the sake of OpenShift compatibility and flexibility with randomized user IDs that ensures effectively this ensures that everything works as expected because environment variables have to line up no matter what the UID is. Look, DB migrate calls directly into the registry database. So all of its scripts here to have all their needs met. So I believe we can safely say that the only thing we actually needed to add to the container was the necessary add user patterns to get it to work. And yes, technically I could have had the layer that did that, the tarballs, and then the layer that did that. But if you're going to make a suite of changes that are literally one line, compress them if you can. And the ownership changes that are here, in all honesty, we could have the add before or after the layers. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to leave it where it is for now. Status. Italy finished. If. Yeah. Adder. Yeah.
I guess you could say though that those tarballs are the likely component to change, right? So they would bust the cache before that user gets added.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that add user and copying over the scripts is not going to change much. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Right. So it's one of those, where does the cache actually bust? But the question is, does add account for that on the add being a tarball and whether the tarball has a signature change?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a good question right there that people don't think about. Is, well, yeah, okay, if it does bust, which makes sense, how does it bust? Why does it bust? How do I trigger a bust?
Successful build.
Back to the pipeline.
And that was Kidley.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
So
I'm
the
just coming
way
back to
for
see if
web
everything else
service.
passes.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Rails is, or container
Rails.
registry is going to fail. So there's into that. So Rails and Toolbox. Rails blew up previously. Don't even need to open that. It just finished. We knew registry was going to blow up. Italy's install is firing. And then we can look at this. I think Workhorse was working okay previously. I don't expect that the final problem with Workhorse will be too much of an issue, but you know, we'll see. Toolbox ought to fire okay, but again, we'll see.
Was Toolbox one of the failing ones before?
Don't think so. but we weren't. I don't think we were getting to toolbox. Is the
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, we skipped it because Rails was exploding. So any image based upon it would
Mhm.
then turn around and fail. So we're further along in the pipelines than we've ever been because of dependencies.
Cool.
The fun part of the GitLab Rails tarball in this particular image for workhorse is a dependency factor because we need the Go code from the checkout on Rails, but we only need to go binary and the asset results.
Hmm.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, to be fair, we're in Builder, so it's not in the final image, but it's just interesting that like tripping Git is what ended up tripping the installation of Shadow Utils and Pam. It's doing its thing. Toolbox appears to have fired correctly, at least for the build. Put it that way. All right, so I should be able to look at the pipeline. And I should see Toolbox activate shortly. There's no surprise. Come on. I think Workhorse at this point might be waiting on Rails to be able to get the compiled asset contents, compile it, and build. I wonder what it's waiting on. Yeah. It's waiting on its own binary, which is just finished. And it's waiting on the Rails image for a reason. I don't really know off the top of my head. I don't remember runtime wise, while the workhorse in UBI depends upon GitLab Rails EE. I'd have to go look what it does. Toolbox is waiting on Rails. Well, that one makes a lot of sense because Toolbox is literally the Rails image with a different set of startup scripts and the additional tools for doing, Toolbox things, aka talking to the system, rake tasks, all of that. So that's an expected change. Rails should finish. Rails. Unsurprisingly, Rails. Yeah. Oh, and these warnings, by the way, Mitch, those are actually really super easy. Turn off. It's a quick one-line sed that basically goes, if you're looking for the entitlements manager, just shut up. It changes a config file with a single sed, and then you never see it again. So I've got a separate MR that actually does address that.
Is that checking to see if you're like a paid license?
Yes. So like if you were to be building the container on a host that was Red Hat, that did have licenses, that did have other subscriptions, you could then use other repositories. But basically you can turn that off because we're never going to care because the images aren't supposed to have subscription-based packages. Yeah, the GitLab workhorse tarball being 313 megs, by the way. Most of that's assets.
Yeah.
I go to phase 5, and go phase 6, and go to workhorse. I know it's not going to fire because Rails isn't done yet, but what in that one does actually depend on it? Workhorse, my friend. I think that might actually be an inaccurate dependency in UBI. Like it does depend on it in Debian at the moment, but I think this might actually be inaccurate because it's going off base image here. So if we look at code, GitLab CI common, GitLab workforce. The need dependency is not here. And base image is definitely there. We do care about the Rails version. I wonder if that's why. Because we pull the Rails tag version. And yes, I'm doing it there because it's faster than me trying to navigate the sidebar. So if I look at that workhorse EE, we have, it depends specifically on GitLab Rails. I would bet you that's because we're specifically trying to pull the SHA and say that workhorse is directly related to this version of the Rails container because the assets have to match. Huh. That will be related to the issue that we have open about refactoring container version calculations. Yeah. Assumptions. It blew up on not having SU. All right. All right.
Is that shadow utils too?
Let us find out. DNF provides SU. Util Linux. SU. Not found. Mm-hmm. Where do we call SU? Command not found in SU. Oh, right. Go, and then we go down to Rails. This is part of the final image state, where we do the boot snap cache. So we actually need to do a micro DNF install to put in util Linux, and then a uninstall to take it back out. Because actually, you know what? Let me make sure it has DU while I'm here. Okay, it has DU. That's good. Don't have to do that. We have a micro. Yep, there we are. Install, best assume yes, no docs. Copy. Boop. That's you. ubi-minimal does not have SU.
I'm guessing chown and chmod are there.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Nope. Those come from core utils. Which is also why DU is there. DNF remove. SU. Actually, you know what? Let me see. How much stuff does it install? Micro DNF install. U. Oh, right, because that's not the name of the package, Jason. Still Linux. Well, that installs a few things.
Shadow utils.
Gzip, cracklib. All right, so
But at least removing it should remove all those, right?
nope. MicroDNF doesn't actually have a means to do a recursive remove, if I remember correctly. Remove help. Nope.
So uninstalling util Linux wouldn't remove all those.
So micro DNF. We'll install it fresh. It removed one package, which means it actually left 11 behind. Now, 4 of those were just upgraded packages. So really it left 7 behind. Which, of those 7, the question is which ones? Right? So it upgraded block ID, mount, smart calls, and UUID. So in adding util Linux, we got shadow utils, PAM, utempter, PIRPC, SE manage, password quality, NSL, fdisk. What? Gzip and both cracklib sets. Now, let's do this one fresh again. And I'm going to take this whole line, copy, install what the image says that it needs for runtime. right, so there's a chunk of them. I'm gonna go back to GitLab base and install what it says it needs for runtime. Now then, now let's see what it says it's going to do. What did it say the assume yes was? In the configuration file. Okay. Util. So now it only adds 10 new packages, which are all of these. Because we can basically ignore the upgrading ones and only care about the ones that are listed as installing.
So we can explicitly uninstall them, but if util Linux ever adds a package, we would silently keep it around.
Right. So this goes back to that whole how scenario. Right. That we basically end up having to write a script to watch the output of microdNF, transaction log, and remove everything that it claims. Right? Whee!
Can we achieve that boot snap cache without SU somehow?
If we rewrite this section a little bit, we might be able to. Effectively, because of the chown and chmod, that's where we have to be careful. So the SU is here because this whole block is operating as root. And user has not been specified. Right? So because user hasn't been specified anywhere, because if you set user, then you have to worry about like the later images that build on top of it, turning around and doing stuff. That's where we're at this point. So if no further image needs to do things as root prior to being as the Git user, then yes, we could get rid of SU. Okay, so for the sake of this, I'm just going to go with this for the testing purpose. Let's see what gets based on this. Let's look at web services final. Yeah, see, we still turn around and run microdNF to install things before we set user ID. There's sort of ways around this, but for us to get away from having SU for the sake of Bootsnap, because Bootsnap needs it to operate correctly, we would have to move user up. In order to move user up, we have to not have to flip to root and then back. And that'll have cascading impacts across everything else. It's not that it's unachievable, mind you, it's the impact is high. So I'm going to do this for now, noting that, let's see, the add, install, remove. I don't actually need SU. I need util Linux. Making sure I can actually read the thing, it might be easier. Libutemper, tempter, I'm sorry. Libitrpc. Lib quality. No, PW quality.
It's just libtir, not lib.
Oh, IT, right. Lib nsl2, lib fdisk. Geez, I get the nasty feeling something's going to need that later on, but we'll come back to that. Cracklib. And I'll bet those last two are for the sake of PW quality.
So where was SU in that?
SU comes from util Linux.
Is that an actual package that came through?
Yeah.
Oh, got it.
Add UBI. No, I don't need the whole line. Thank you. All right. Well, that's pushed up now. This pipeline, did it ever finish? That one exploded. Workhorse would never run. It would be in a failed state because the entire last phase is relies on Rails. So they're all skipped. Okay. And then we just fired off a new pipeline, and the UI is confused. Right. So I'm going to let that sit there. And then from that point, even after we get all the images to build, we then have to turn around and deploy them and run them all and run a full QA and try to exercise everything. And then cross our finger. And then we have other things like if people are using server-side hooks on GitLab, things are going to change, right? Because UBI is not ubi-minimal, as we've seen. Certain assumptions are just not accurate, which means if they're assuming that they've made the changes they need to make UBI work, well, then if they're not actually using UBI anymore, then those assumptions are now false. So it could have a user impact. Let's not even get started on the fact that because we ship to DSOP, DSOP then needs to know that we're also switching all of our images to be based on that instead of that, and the impacts are ABC, and they need to make necessary changes, that kind of thing. So our partners down the line that either build off of or base on very similar from what we do also have to be notified and impacted, and any customer who's doing their own image builds, which they do exist, also have to know, etc., etc. Oh yeah, and don't forget anything that we do that has a CI script that touches the inside of the image also has to be checked. I mean, we are changing the OS. I mean, it's not really changing the OS, the operating system itself, the distribution, but it is changing the assumptions made on the content of the base image. All right, I'm gonna hit stop. Did you have any other questions?
No, it was a good run through.
All right, so if anybody else has made it to this point in the video, thanks for watching and your patience, and I'm betting you ran it like double speed. Okay. If you have questions, find our agenda doc. We have multiple issues related to this. I've shown the MR on my screen for the better part of the entire video, so we can collaborate there if you have any further questions, and feel free to raise questions or concerns or other things that we get the engagement. Thanks for everybody for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.